Now I'm just going to quickly reintroduce many of today's speakers who will be participating in this final session called Strategies for Acting and Staying Balanced on a Code Red Planet. So the presenters, I've been asked to engage with all of you about how do we stay engaged in the face of the threatening planetary realities that are born of unbridled militarism and greed and what we've been talking about today. I've given all of the speakers the ability to unmute themselves to speak, and I'd ask all the other participants to send their questions either by typing in the chat, or you can raise your hands using the Zoom raise hand function. So usually that's at the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. Click that, and then you click raise hand, and then I'll recognize you and unmute you to ask your question. But now I'll just welcome back to the stage Greta Zarro, Jaziba Zuleika, Carole Sargent, Cynthia Lazaroff, Lindsay Koshgarian, Martha Hennessy, and Ricky Clousing. And again, I'll welcome back John to moderate the discussion and to begin with a few questions to initiate it.
Thank you all for the excellent session on nuclear weapons and a very fine conference. So we're talking about strategies now and how to proceed, how to affirm the future. And we sent for the audience, we sent out 4 questions just to stimulate conversation, but we certainly welcome everybody's questions on chat. And we also want this to be as spontaneous as possible too. So in essence, we'll start with the question, what strategies do you employ when confronting all of the realities that we are facing to keep going, to keep your commitment to activism and to keep a sense of well-being? Because a lot of us, at various points, we do find it quite overwhelming and daunting with events happening now that are truly out of our control. For example, Ida in New York City, with flash flooding and drowning people in their basement apartments. That was quite close to home for us here. And of course, you know, there's the fires in California, and I could go down the list, but I'm not going to. But anybody who has some interesting thoughts on strategies and how they renew themselves and keep a sense of well-being, we'd welcome your comments from the panel.
I can just jump in. This is Greta. You know, if anyone was earlier on this conference and heard my 2-prong approach talk, if you were here for that, then I think you'll know my answer to this question, which is the second prong that I talked about, which is kind of the tangible, actionable, on the ground work, which for me is farming and living off grid and trying to be connected to nature and living in community with other people. Those strategies for me are what keep me invigorated and give me a lot of hope to see young people who are engaging in that kind of work. So I think it's very important, and I urge everyone to do that 2-prong approach, and I think that can make you feel like you're doing some tangible changes and give you hope as you're then also doing the first prong of policy advocacy and grassroots organizing and lobbying Washington and that kind of work, which can take much, much longer to make change.
Martha, you had mentioned a spiritual dimension, and how does your Catholic faith and how belief in God help you sustain your incredible work?
Thanks, John. What can I say? You know, we have the saints, we have each other, we have this tradition in the Catholic worker movement of practicing the works of mercy versus the works of war. And you know, this kind of work of feeding the homeless and being with the prisoner is not something that is at all easy, and it does take its toll on us. And you know, the humility, again, the humility and the sense of humor is what I really rely on, as well as family, friends, and community. And it's not in our hands. I mean, for me, the definition of faith is that there is a God, and God is love. And as long as we have that understanding for each other, then things can go okay. And, I would rather have a voice crying out, saying no to the madness than to be silent. So I find the work to be very rejuvenating.
I'm wondering about the role community plays in our lives. I know it's very important here. In upstate New York, we have Upstate Drone Action, and there is a tight-knit community of protesters. We are demonstrating against the Reaper drone at Hancock, and sometimes up at Niagara. Demonstrations get done too. But Greta, you have your own community around your farm. The Kateri Peace Conference served when it was more of a live conference, and we had audiences, live audiences and in-person events to develop community here. But if people could, I think community is vitally important to us. And while Zoom allows us to do some international work and cover long distances, it also doesn't allow us that in-person contact. So if anybody would care to comment on community. Carole?
Yeah, the writing that I was able to do, either the book with Father Drew Christensen or the book about Transform Now Plowshares, all grew out of community. And it's interesting because it was my response to the 2016 election that I wanted to go live in community. It was something I'd done when I was young. We think of that as something just young people do. But I'm 61 and I now run a community that I founded in 2019 after living with the sisters and after seeing, I always tell people, don't just start a community, go to a thriving one and kind of learn all the dumb mistakes they made so you don't repeat everything that they've already spent so much time learning. But then, so my house here in Georgetown is connected to Anne Montgomery House. And so what we do is we try to keep them interconnected, and what then the house becomes is a place of refreshment, not just for yourself, but for the others who come and stay. I started getting pilgrims right away. We got the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Megan Rice was part of the very first dinner. I've had people find us from Canada and say, oh, I heard about you. And you're like, you heard about us? How? And so it just grows. And I think we're all tribal. And I did not invent that idea, obviously. But coming through this, I realized that we've lost our tribes and our supports. And a lot of the whaling work that is done out west is just simply over the profound loss of tribes and peaceful communities. But anyway, I don't want to digress too far, except to say that to me, community is everything, and not one word that I've written about these peace activists would have been possible without their longstanding communities that I got to go be part of. And so go join one.
Thank you, Carole. Anne Wright has her hand raised, and I'm trying to figure out how to unmute her.
That's okay. I've done it. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, thank you. Well, what a great morning. I'm out here in Hawaii with Cynthia, so it's been a little early morning for us. So my coffee has really gotten me going here. But all I would say is get off your butt. All you have to do is start doing something. Get out on the street with your one little sign on whatever issue it is, and you'll be amazed at how there are going to be some people that'll come up to you, even if you're only one person, and probably because you're only one person there, why are you doing this? So, the community of the challenging times of COVID, of trying to stay safe, but you can stay safe on a street corner. You can stay safe in small groups or even in larger groups. And then I would also say, because it's lonely, just being a Zoom addict is a very lonely thing, even though we've got 40 people on this Zoom call, but still you're sitting in your house by yourself or with your dog or with your family. But you do need to get out and be with people of like minds to challenge things. And then my last little thing is, don't underestimate the power of a pen. Even a small little letter to the article or letter to the newspaper about, whatever issue it is. Like as we were doing all of this, I was writing my usually weekly letter to the editor on something in Hawaii, but this one was on, killer drones. Why do we have killer drones here in Hawaii that are being flown over here so far away? So I've got my little letter to the editor asking about this. So there's lots we can do, and it only takes doing it. So let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. One of the other questions we sent, the second question was working with the idea that Dr. King presented in his letter from the Birmingham jail, and the idea there being that the protests and the confrontations were designed to not allow the larger community to ignore the injustices, in that case of segregation and racism, and that it was necessary since the existing communities failed totally to negotiate the issues and bring about a peaceful resolution, they would use a nonviolent form of confrontation to create a creative tension which no longer could be ignored. And so often we engage with similar or the same strategies in arrest scenarios, not wanting to be arrested, but wanting the larger community not to ignore the injustices of drone warfare, of murdering innocent people. So the question basically is just for people on the panel who have engaged in this type of work to bring forth some of the ways that they've made the situation unignorable, that they've confronted the larger community. And I certainly, for example, Martha has confronted the larger community in the Kings Bay action, and she might speak on that a little bit. But I know so many of other folks, both listening in as the audience and on the panel, have done that too. I mean, Ricky told his story, an amazing story of not allowing the Army to ignore the abuses and bringing it up as a matter of conscience. And so if people would care to comment on that aspect of their work, or even events that they have seen that have inspired them to move forward.
So I'm sure I don't have the most inspiring story here, but I'll just say I think part of confronting people isn't just, showing people how terrible things are. A big part of confronting people is giving them an outlet for that. A lot of people understand how terrible things are, but don't necessarily know what they can do about it. Or they have their own struggles. And so part of our approach at National Priorities Project has been not just to confront other people with how terrible war is, but to bring into our work how terrible other forms of militarism are, so that, not just going to the immigrant rights community and saying, war is so terrible, what are you going to do about it? But saying, we're here, we understand that our immigration system is terrible, and we're standing with you to work together to stop that. And then stepping back a little bit and saying, and we're also working on cutting Pentagon spending, and we welcome you to join us in that. But really it's stepping up and making sure that you're there for other struggles. So, stepping up and making sure that we're there for immigrant rights, stepping up and making sure that we're there for racial justice and police brutality and against white supremacy, stepping up and making sure that we're there for climate work, so that it's really becomes more of a two-way street and less of us showing up and demanding that someone else take action on the issues that we've been working on for a long time. And I think that is, it's critical, and it works well. And it's part of the community that we were just talking about, of, being there for each other and supporting each other, and not just, being there to criticize each other or make demands.
Maura, I see your hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Maura Stevens with System Change, Not Climate Change, Coalition to Protect New York, and other groups. And I'm a journalism teacher. So much of what we're talking about is, I think, many of the problems that we face are compounded by the fact that we have a captured media. But I have a question. It's an organizing question, and I'd like to ask Ricky and Greta particularly for any suggestions you might have for reaching people in their 30s and 40s who are so busy with raising families, jobs, etc. They're the hardest group to reach in my experience, and I was hoping you might have some tips for us. Thank you.
Sure, I can jump in. The first thing that comes to mind, and I said this earlier in the day, is the organizing statement, meet people where they're at, meaning first tap into people's own interests and motivations. Let's say the one issue that they are concerned about is climate change. Tap into that, listen to their story and their concerns, and then kind of pivot around to, well, did you know the US military is the largest polluter on Earth? And then connect it to our issues too. So rather than just starting by trying to push our issue, first listen to their interests and their motivations.
Yeah, I would just add also kind of echoing that, and also what Lindsay had brought up of just kind of meeting those different intersections of the movements and how, all of our work is really related. And you would be surprised building bridges with people and communities. That, and then also, like in permaculture, they talk about like stacking functions in the landscape. So designing things with purpose, right? With multi-dimensional layers where every layer is serving a purpose. And so when we look at like that in the social realm, I think it's important to, another principle is, obtaining a yield. And so getting the most back where you're investing your energy. And so meeting other groups and other people and sharing that and building those commonalities of the movements, I think is really a way to stack the functions of activism and really kind of charge the movement in young people. Because there's great, wisdom and passion and experience in the anti-war movement that younger generation, we need to kind of be building those bridges. So yeah, I would say meeting those other people where they're at and keeping that open is definitely great suggestions.
Rachel, I see your hand up. Please unmute and go ahead.
I'm Rachel Branch. A couple of things that I'd like to address. I'm from North Adams, Mass. I'm in my 9th year of producing a community television program called Solutions Rising. Recently, I was very honored that Martha Hennessy agreed to be a guest on my program. Community TV or community access TV is another way for each of us to have some control over what the media is producing. And of course, it's a fight for these community TV stations. And I can find my guests talking to somebody on the street. That is one of the ways you can reach the younger population, is when you bring them on your program. It's, I think, a little exciting for them, but also helps them to be part of what they need to learn and what they have to offer and the gifts they have, and realizing that they could also have a television show. Community television shows are all local, but I have been able to get my program on 13 station, and now with links, it can go all over. And I just have to find a local sponsor in whatever city or town that I'm in. And that is one of the ways to fight back with the media that is not producing the information that we need. And I have a signature line that I say, if each one of us picked up one problem and solved it, imagine the incredible view we would all have of Solutions Rising. Everybody can pick up one problem, but I'm sure most of us here are in arenas for trying to solve the problems. I'm just horrified about climate catastrophe, the COVID pandemic, the effects of the most vulnerable and the children, and the nuclear weapons. I mean, this is screaming time in my heart and my soul weeps. But yes, there are that is one of the ways, community TV, writing letters, running for office. I'm a candidate for mayor for the third time. You just get on commissions, run, do anything you can. Use your gifts. We all have different gifts. Nobody has the same gifts. So that's my little bit of input. I did, when I first started writing, took a line from Edgar Guest that said, "Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker." And the rest of my quote was, "But freedom is thicker than blood, and the power of the pen will win in the end with love. We have to speak up." Thank you.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
That was beautiful, Rachel. I wanted to speak up to the 30s and 40s something. I happen to fall in that age group, and I happen to have a couple of little kids. And for one thing, I want to say media actually is probably the best way to get at that age group, because even when we're busy juggling 16 different things on any given day, we're still listening to podcasts and radio shows and reading articles and checking our phones a million times a day. So that always works well. But I also think that, we probably have to accept a certain amount of people having a little bit of a lull in their lifespan where, in your 20s, maybe you're super active, and then maybe in your 30s and 40s, you're a little less, but then with your 50s and 60s, you come back, right? So I think there is a little bit of sort of a taking the long view. But I think you can also make events really, really child friendly. I live in a community where people bring their kids to Black Lives Matter protests, and children show up at these things. And sometimes you can help that along by having babysitting or having child activities, or even just making clear that children are welcome. So there are things that you can do to help encourage people. And also, a little bit of, reaching out and helping, like offer the babysitting, offer the kid activities, offer forgiveness when somebody doesn't show up last minute because their kid is sick. I think there are ways to keep that age group involved. And I do think part of it is having sort of a more inclusive view of militarism and of war. If the more you can bring race into it, I'm part of several local groups made up entirely of people my own age with children who work on issues of racial justice in the community. So I think there are ways to make it more appealing and ways to make it more open and inclusive. So I'd encourage you to not give up on us 30 and 40 somethings.
I wanted to take 1 second here to encourage people to think about creating peace conferences also. While the, we should be moving past the pandemic, I certainly hope, and we'll be able to meet in person in community. The Kateri Peace Conference is somewhat of a rarity, and it's been going on for 23, 24 years in a small town in upstate New York. So we want to encourage groups of people getting together to discuss peace, and maybe it isn't so formalized as a peace conference, but out of the peace conference also came a book called Bending the Arc, Striving for Peace and Justice in the Age of Endless War. And it has chapters by Wright, who is on the call, Kathy Kelly, David Swanson, who moderated earlier, Jim Merkel, Jim Jennings, and a whole host of other people like Ed Kinane from Syracuse. And he's in the audience today. But we were talking about printed articles, and this was put out by SUNY Press. So it is associated with State University Press in New York, and hopefully will reach more people also with information about a variety of activists. And anything we can do to create community and get these ideas discussed are really helpful. A question we put out was based on the idea of what's orthodox and just generally speaking, conforming to what is generally or traditionally accepted as right. And even the peace movement has its idea of what's orthodox. And I was wondering if people have some ideas that would move us into a more creative endeavor with more energy. when Greta was speaking a few minutes ago and talking about approaching people where they were, I began envisioning Greta bringing pumpkins and corn stalks and a bale of hay and blocking the gates at Hancock while educating people about farming, also protesting the use of military drones in our own backyard. And any creative idea that you might have, we'd certainly welcome to hear it now too.
Yeah, I think especially what I and Ricky were talking about earlier, I think that is kind of the unorthodoxy that we're trying to bring into this conversation. And we're so glad to be part of today's conference. I think that, you know, we both talked about agriculture and permaculture and these different means of making change that go beyond the scope of traditional activism of petitioning and rallying and lobbying. So I think that's what we tried to insert into today's conversation. And hopefully the peace movement will start to kind of expand its definition of tactics and start to include the things that Ricky and I talked about and see those things as forms of activism and as forms of civilian-based defense, as I talked about.
You know, I was thinking that one of the things that we really need to do is also to start, while we are protesting, teach ways for people to begin behaving well. Improve, you know, so suggest diplomacy as an alternative to war while we're protesting the war machine in different creative ways. Ricky, do you have any thoughts on all of this?
I guess like just listening to some of the questions, my thoughts kind of tie in with what we're discussing now with, you know, how do we respond to this? And then what does community mean? And how do we reach, you know, younger generations and bring them in? Is I would say a lot of this stuff that's been discussed already has been great. I would also just like expand it to understanding, you know, we all know war always seeks to separate, you know, first each other, but also from the environment. And so we're also, you know, part of this war on the planet that we all, you know, need to make space individually to heal our own relationship to the land. And also recognizing nature as our community. And so I think it's great when we start to, you know, look at our, you know, the nearby nature and the environments around us and the ecosystems that we're a part of, and can start acknowledging and respecting and learning about those, because, you know, the earth is our teacher, and the earth is wanting to teach us, and it's guiding us back into these ways that are really part of all of our history. And so I think that the more we can also consider community in that respect and our non-human relatives, that there will be great change to come from that.
Thank you, Ricky. If there's anybody in the audience who is shy, but has a question or a comment that they wanted to add, I want to encourage you to raise your hand and speak up. Also overcome your shyness for a moment, and or if you know, that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to pose as a question, because it's a question I've been asked every year, or almost every year I've run this conference, and the way it's phrased kind of irritates me, because the question is, why do we only have white people here? Why aren't there any black people?
We do have one.
And normally, we did have a black gentleman attend today here at the shrine. But then I thought about this question because, and there are certainly exceptions too, but I thought about this question a lot because, for one thing, nobody ever asked me about why aren't there any Spanish people here, or Indians or Asians. And another thing is, my question is, in the years that we've run this conference and had, you know, some fairly large but mostly modest attendance, why aren't there more white people here?
Mm-hmm.
Why is peace, you know, I mean, I know we have a war machine. I know we have cultural indoctrination that is incredibly unbelievable. I've been a victim of it. That's how I ended up in the Marine Corps. but what can we do? What can we do to make peace a really attractive idea?
I see Mary and Carol's hands up. I think they may have raised their hand before you posed that question, John. But if either of you would like to respond to the question John just posed, I'll invite you to unmute yourself and do so. Or if there are others, I see Cynthia's hand is also up who want to respond to the question John has posed first. Maybe let's start with that, and then I'll come back to the previous hands.
I just have a quick thought that white privilege is a section of the book that I just wrote about Transform Now Plowshares, and some activists have framed activism where you get arrested as a responsible use of white privilege, because if a browner person were in the same place, they might be in much more peril. And so, and many of the activists reflected on it, the degree to which they thought white privilege was a piece of this. And then also to say that I think when people are of color, they see violence differently. They see it more directed at them. So I just gave a talk on imposter syndrome, and I shared an article that said, stop telling women of color they have imposter syndrome. It could be internalized racism. They could be seeing things that are really coming at them, and they just don't, they don't know what it is because it's covered up or sugar-coated or whatever. So there are many, many other reasons, and I won't speak for people of color about why they're in the movement, but I can say that a lot of white people have reflected on why they're overrepresented. And if you happen to be a woman, get in the conversation, because when I went to the Vatican about nuclear disarmament, it was a boys' club and needed more women.
I'm going to interject with Ed.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's been wonderful being here. It's been such an excellent series of presentations. I'm here with John and Maureen at Kateri, actually, and not on screen otherwise. But I wanted to respond to John's concern about insufficient attention to peace issues by whites and others. And I would simply say we might get more intersectionality and bring in more people if we talked about not only peace, which is just one dimension, but peace and justice. If we learn not to use just the trope of peace, but we expanded it to peace and justice, I think we'd get more traction.
Yeah, jump in, Julienne.
Hi, I'm also in the audience, and I would like to respond to John asking, why aren't there more white people? As I'm white, I want to only speak for white people, for at least myself as a white person. And I would suggest that it's just too painful for so many people to face up to the truth. To face it, even if they know about it, it's so much easier just to close off and carry on and keep your family going and do all the things you're meant to do as a US citizen. I think is the pain that stops them from coming.
Thank you, Ed and Julienne. We are nearing the end of the conference. Are there any last thoughts by any of our panelists?
I've promised Cynthia and Mary that we'll get to their hands. So hopefully we can do that quickly.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel. I just wanted to address the question first of, what kind of creative ways can we come together, and the question that John, you raised about diplomacy. And I think that, here we are at this conference, we're in this code red moment, we're in it, we have to face that. And what some of the younger ones here, to Greta and the others who have spoken about showing up for each other and not just trying to get people involved in whatever we're doing, I think is so important. I think that we need to think about ways to give expression to the intersectionality through diplomacy that not only is domestic, but is really international. And so I would offer one idea that has been out there that I really am inspired by, which is that we imagine a kind of moonshot moment where people from Russia and the United States, and then all the nuclear armed states and all countries of the world come together in a moonshot moment to plant the trillion trees that climate scientists would be game changing for the climate, potentially reducing CO2 emissions by up to a third. This kind of brings together diplomacy and climate and people from everywhere. It's a big idea. It has to be done. The right trees have to be planted in the right place. It's not a simple thing, but it's something that we can all do that shows our capacity to do something together for humanity, that takes us out of our separation and silos. And I also just wanted to say that for me, that this is connected to the indigenous wisdom, which is what I turn to in addition to prayer in my moments of looking for strength and resilience and the reservoir of resilience. And my teachers here have said two things I wanted to share. One is that there's no separation in aloha, that we're all one in aloha, and there is that spirit of love bringing us together. And the other is that the instruction to go to the place that it's already done. In these moments of despair, I was told, go to the beach where you're visiting your great-great-great-grandchildren who are thanking you for creating the world that we all want to see, that we have to see it, even in the face of all these challenges, to be able to make it happen. If we can't see it, it's not going to happen. So those two things I wanted to just share, and then to really echo what Ricky said about refuge in the earth and Greta said in the land. For me, it's Mother Ocean and the farm here, just listening to the earth, the sacred mountain behind me, that there's a teaching there, and what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. So it comes back to there's no separation.
And go ahead, Mary, please. We just have barely any time left, so I'll ask you to be as brief as possible.
A minute. I won't speak as long as what people could have done. John, if you say people of color, you will cover Asians and Blacks and Latinx and Asian and all. But I just want to say, like 8 or 9 years ago, maybe more, I went to the two-row, they had a two-row event between the Haudenosaunee, the Algonquin, and the whites. And it was to celebrate the first treaty between whites and Native Americans. And at every single event, and a Mohawk or an Onondaga would read a prayer of gratitude, and they would thank everything. And sometimes it would take half an hour. I will not take half an hour, but they would thank the chickadees. They would thank the mosquitoes for feeding the birds and for biting their arms. They would thank the trees. They would thank everything. And it is one thing that keeps me going, is when I look out in the morning and look out at my bird feeders, is thanking the chickadee for his little love call, thanking the robins for eating the worms. Thank you. And thank you all so much for this conference. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Mary. And I guess if there are no more hands raised, Rachel, that need attention, we will conclude the conference, as it has to end at 2 due to World Beyond War's other existing obligations. So Maureen and I traditionally do the thank yous in the more orthodox sense of the word. But Mary, thank you for your comments too. And all of the people who have graced us with questions today in the audience, thank you so much for attending. All of our speakers, brilliant, excellent job by everyone. Carole, Ricky, Cynthia, Joseba, Martha, who else? Quickly. Lindsay, of course, and I don't know if I've missed anybody. A little tired at now. I don't think I have. We want to thank the Franciscan Friars of Fonda for hosting us for 20, actually, technically speaking, 24 years at the shrine, and they've always been a great help. Maureen?
I'd like to thank the Sanctuary for Independent Media, and Mark Dunley for giving us the opportunity to share information about the conference. I'd like to thank Cynthia Pooler, who's an example of what Rachel's talking about, Rachel Branch was talking about, someone who's intrepidly looking for ways to provide a voice to those who often don't get a chance in traditional media, who gave us an opportunity to talk about the conference. I'd like to thank World Beyond War, because Greta, David, Rachel, what you're doing is providing a house as the Haudenosaunee people came together, realizing that the only way they could survive was by coming together, providing a house for us all to meet in, and doing it with such grace and kindness and openness. And thank you all for the grace of today, because you feed my spirit as this conference always does, and you provide incredible challenges for moving forward. I am very grateful.
We wanted also to affirm the idea that flowed through the conference in so many different ways, but it's a belief in love, a belief in community and service. There's a saying, if you want to feel better about yourself, do something for somebody else. And so true it is. So it's been a great day. Thank you again all for attending. If we have missed anybody who we owe, a mention of gratitude to, please forgive us. We have our own little studio audience today, people who traveled down from Syracuse and locally, and we want to thank them for coming too. And so until the next time, let's keep working for peace, keep the faith, remembering that love will triumph. And blessings upon all of you, and thanks again.